All right, we'll go ahead now and get started. And I'm glad you folks could join us. And I'm confident in that I'm speaking for the leadership um, of Prince of Peace and the school and the parish to say that we are thinking about all of you and praying for you and your family during this very difficult time. And we're hoping that you'll be able to stay in touch with us by visiting the parish website and also this Facebook page. A lot of information. We're having services being live streamed, and Father Fallon is posting some lovely messages, and so there's a lot going on, and we're doing what we can to stay connected. We want to try to be a source of comfort and reassurance to all of our families as we go through this together. And along those lines, if there's anything, I am working from home. If there's anything I can do for you as Director of Family Life, please email me. The easiest way to do that is to go to the Prince of Peace website, and you can email me from there. And while I'm on the topic of the website, the Prince of Peace website, I keep a blog there. And if you'll check it, if you go to the website, kind of scroll down to on the left side, about halfway down, you'll see Dale Wisely's blog. That's the clever name for it. The last 3 or 4 blog entries have been about the coronavirus and families. And included in that is a long and excellent post by my friend and colleague Dan Marullo, M-A-R-U-L-L-O. Might want to write that name down, Daniel Marullo, M-A-R-U-L-L-O. Dan, I've known Dan for 30 years. He's a psychologist at Children's Hospital, and he's posting, he's posting all kinds of wonderful information about dealing with all of this as our families and as individuals. So you might want to look up Daniel Marullo on Facebook and follow his feed. It's terrific information. So do check out my blog for a couple of things that might be useful to you. I want to make a few comments and then try to answer some questions that some of you have emailed me. And I'm emphasizing I'm going to try because we are in, I hate to use this overused phrase, but we are definitely in uncharted waters in trying to cope with all this. So it's not like, I can draw on all the research about how people are do in a pandemic, because I just don't think that psychological research is out there, and it's not like any of us have any experience with it. I've been a psychologist for 38 years, and I obviously have no experience with a pandemic in America of this scale. It's been 100 years since we've had one, and 100 years ago we didn't really have psychologists or mental health or services or anything else. So I also want to acknowledge that it's true. It's both true that we are all in this together, but it's also true that we're in it separately, in the sense that every one of us and every one of our families is in a different situation, somewhat different situation. I keep thinking about the families who were already experiencing serious troubles before the pandemic hit. Families struggling with lots of conflict in their families, or going through a divorce, family members who are ill, or who have mental illness or troubles with addiction, and people who are already struggling, financially, and worried about their jobs and their businesses. All of that before the pandemic. And so, let's just try to remember those folks. Pray for them if you're so inclined. And also, let's remember that there are people that are having a harder time than we are, no matter how hard it is for all of us. So let's try to find time to reach out to those people by telephone or other electronic means to support those folks that we're worried about. And remember, we don't have to have answers for them. If we have nothing to offer other than to hear them, listen to them, acknowledge their pain, that's not nothing. That's something. In fact, that's something of great value. So let's try to remember that. And that's also a lesson for our kids. Our kids can see us serve each other and reach out to our friends. And that's a great lesson for our kids. I've got more to say about that in a minute. Now, I'm as in these comments, I'm going to address some of the, some of the tragedy and the pain in all of this. And I want to ask you to bear with me because I do want to end up with some, what I hope is sort of a message of, hope and reassurance about getting through all of this. But here we are, in Lent. Remember that. And Lent, even an ordinary Lent, which this isn't. This is, it's not a time to turn away from the tragedy of life or from the suffering. And, because of the pandemic, people have already suffered losses. And we anticipate suffering more loss. Financial losses, which aren't just about money, but, our worries about being able to take care of ourselves and our families. And that causes anxiety and fear. And I suspect that by the time this is all over, most of us will have lost someone we know to the virus. Or we will suffer losses because of the economy, or both. And loss causes us grief. But I always remind myself that grief and love are married to each other. We can't love without grief. We can't grieve without being people who love. And so we're creatures who grieve because we're creatures who love, and it can be no other way. So all those feelings, the grief and the sadness and the worry and anxiety and anger, all those things, you don't need me to tell you this, but I'm going to anyway. They are okay. They're normal, or at least as best we can figure in uncharted waters, they're normal, certainly to be expected. And I would even argue that these feelings are necessary. If we don't have moments of worry and sadness and grief in this unprecedented tragedy, you'd have to ask why we're not having those feelings. So we need to give ourselves permission and give each other permission to feel these things. If you're with somebody who's hurting, don't feel like you have to fix their feelings. I don't know if you've had this experience, but if you share your pain with somebody, your worry, and they quickly come in with a solution or an answer or advice, you ever feel kind of resentful of that? I think sometimes we think we want people's advice, but I don't know that we really do. I think what we want is people to hear us and not judge, and accept our feelings as they are and just listen and so forth. So let's reassure, but not try to fix it. Let's just be present and be attentive to each other and our families and among our friends. Let's listen. That listening without judgment is a great treasure. All right, so I've already warned you, I've got to deal with some dark stuff. And I have been, and many of us have been in the mental health business, have been trying to sound the alarm now for a year or so that we had already been in a national crisis about suicide. Suicide rates have been increasing in the United States for about the last 15 years. Among youth, they've been increasing steadily for about 10 years. Actually, after several years of actually going down. So we have already been in a crisis of suicide. And we don't know how that's going to change because of this crisis. My understanding is suicide rates went down during World War II. Maybe there was a sense of common purpose, or I don't know what it was, but we all know there's a real possibility that suicide rates are going to increase during this crisis. And so we need to be attentive to that in our families and among our friends. And there's a lot of good information available to people about this topic. And we need to not be afraid to ask each other and ask our family members if they are feeling suicidal. And there's a lot more I could say about that, but I just want to be attentive to it and suggest again that you might want to look on the web. Also, take a look at that blog that I have at Prince of Peace's website. And scroll down, there's some information there about that. So let's be conscious about that. I want to focus now on our youth, and I just a couple more comments. I've been concerned about the implications of this pandemic for the safety of children. Now we know that at least so far the disease itself largely is sparing children, but I still think the pandemic is putting children at risk. So for 14 years, I worked at Children's Hospital, a wonderful experience. I wouldn't trade it for anything. And one of the things that we know is that the emergency room is much busier in the summer than during the school year. When children are not in school, that's when they tend to get injured. And here we are in a similar situation where we have kids that are not in school. Even with all the worries we have about school shootings, truthfully, children are safer at school than they are at home. And that's statistically clearly true. So my grandson took a little spill and required some stitches. He'll be fine. Two friends of mine, good friends of mine, separate families, have already had sons, 10, 12 years old, with broken bones. So, and this is not a good time for any of us to get hurt. So with all of the freedom, or not, but with all the changes in our routines and kids being at home instead of school, we just need to be conscious of doing even more than we normally do to try to keep them safe from being injured. Also, I worry because all the stress and conflict in families of being cooped up and all the pressure people are feeling, trying to work at home, trying to homeschool their kids, and all the worries we have that one of the implications of that is that people may yell at each other and say really awful things that are hard to walk back, Also think about the people who have to go to work, all these heroic people that, not just healthcare workers, but everybody who are in essential jobs. And many of them, because their kids are not in school, are probably having to rely on less than ideal, childcare situations that may not be as safe as the more typical childcare situation. So all that's somewhat worrisome to me. I don't mean to be presumptuous about this. All of us are doing our best for our kids, but I just want to encourage us not to neglect the safety aspect of all this. That's kind of an obsession of mine, and so I'm trying to keep kids uninjured, so I need to say that. All right, those are comments. So let me see. I want to handle a couple of questions that came in, and I picked 3 to start with. 2 of them because I think 2 of these questions kind of represent like the mothers of all questions. The sort of the things that so many of us are struggling with, or so many of you are struggling with. And then there's another one I picked just because I think it's especially interesting and something we might not be thinking about. Let me do that one first. So question, I love this question. My teenager is going stir crazy, and to be honest, we need a break. So we've let her go out and visit her friends. She promises us she is maintaining social distance. All right, so I'm going to go out on a limb here. If she's going out with her friends, she is not maintaining social distance. I would bet my last dollar. I'm not calling your child a liar, but I'm just saying, um, we ought to completely get it. When you're a teenager, your whole life is about your friendships and your connections to peers. And social media, of course, is a part of that. That's still happening. But um, teenagers can certainly be desperate to get together. And we all know that there's kind of a problem with this writ large, kind of the big picture, like the spring break phenomenon that we all looked at with horror, you know, last week, where all these people on all these college kids on beaches. And so writs take that whole thing and take it down smaller. Teenagers are going to want to get together, and the chances they'll be 6 feet apart from each other are about zero. So you will never catch me saying this is easy. But I would be very reluctant to turn teenagers loose. Having them all at home, everybody cooped up, nobody, again, hard. But I would be concerned about that promise about social distance. Okay, so this is obviously a big question. The next one: how can I talk to my kids about the virus? How can I communicate with my kids? This person's question, I don't want to lie to them, and I don't want to scare them. And questions about how to talk to kids are always difficult to answer because it depends so much, obviously, on age and maturity. What you would say to a 16-year-old, obviously you would never say to a 6-year-old. Let me say that again, make sure I said it right. What you would say to a 16-year-old, you would probably not say to a 6-year-old. That is what I meant to say. So the other issue is it just about where they are developmentally, but you take 2 7-year-olds, one of them might be much better able to handle facts about the virus than another 7-year-olds. So it's hard. So all I can really do is try to offer some kind of general principles about this. So as a general rule, we don't want to lie. We don't want to lie, in an effort to try to be reassuring. We don't need to lie. And lie is too strong of a word, but you know what I mean. Offer, false reassurance. Honey, everything's going to be fine. There's no way anybody or anybody's grandma or grandpa is going to get sick, whatever it is. So one of the reasons it's not a good idea to lie to kids in 2020 is because they can go on Google and find out in 30 seconds if you're lying to them, right? So it doesn't really work. Now, so we don't need to lie to them, but that doesn't mean that we need to volunteer all of the information we have or we know. That, again, is going to depend on the age of the child. So one thing, if your child isn't saying much or asking questions, it might be a good idea to say, do you have any questions you want to ask me about this virus or this sickness? I just hate for a child to be worried sick and somehow afraid to ask questions, So I just can't see a downside to saying to our kids, not necessarily teenagers, but you certainly could do this with teenagers, but particularly with younger kids, being willing to say, do you have any questions? And I think that would be particularly important to do if you have a child who's prone to worry and anxiety. They're kind of a worrier. Really sometimes very intelligent kids, like gifted, bright kids, difficult time with this kind of thing, a tragedy or a worry, because their intellect allows them to know more, but they're not necessarily any more emotionally mature than their non-gifted peers. So they may have the intellectual wherewithal to really understand a lot about how scary the virus is, but not necessarily any more emotional maturity than the next kid. So I think sometimes very intelligent kids, gifted kids, can really have a particular struggle with this. So if we get a question like, could grandma or grandpa die from the virus? We could say, when we get to be older, it's always really important to take care of ourselves when we're older. So grandma and grandpa need to take care of themselves. So here's what grandma and grandpa are doing to try to keep from getting sick. And we can also say that because it's true that most people don't have the disease. We can say that even for old people, the ones who are going to get the infection they'll get sick, but it's not going to be fatal. Even with a, relatively high mortality rate among senior citizens, still the majority of people, survive the illness. So we can say that to kids in different ways, depending on their maturity level. I've also, just made myself a note, I've also suggested that in times of family crisis, and this can be a family crisis we're in, but illness, divorce, anything that could really shake a child's world, and this event is shaking a lot of kids' worlds. We need to remember that children, and the younger they are, the more this is true, children are very much focused on whether they will be taken care of. So for example, in a divorce situation, to get us out of the pandemic for a second, in a divorce situation, and over the years when I worked with families going through a divorce, I would say, you need to assume that your child may be unsure. Your child may not know that after the divorce, they will have beds to sleep in, and so sometimes we should assume that young kids are worried that a crisis means that they will not be taken care of. They won't be, And so I've often said, why don't we say, you are loved. We love you. You will always be loved, and we will always take care of you. Now, if something happened so that we were sick and we couldn't take care of you, someone who loves you will take care of you, right? So I think that's a fair kind of reassurance. And again, we don't necessarily want to wait until we have some specific reason to think the child has those concerns. Sometimes we just should anticipate it and say, you do know now that no matter what happens, someone will take care of you. We'll take care of you, and you'll be taken care of. I think that's just, I don't feel like I'm articulating that particularly well, but I think that's really an important thing. Okay, had a couple of questions that I sort of put together because they're sort of variations on the same question, which is questions about how to cope with being cooped up, all the bickering and the conflict. And then I think parents are struggling with getting their kids to get their schoolwork done, maybe getting chores done, and all the things that we often struggle with, but they're just kind of magnified right now. And this is not summer vacation. Sorry, that's my special talent for stating the obvious. This is definitely not like summer vacation. We have all these levels of stress and worry and anxiety added on, which makes it easier for people to snap at each other and holler and scream and carry on. So this is a really big question, how do we get along better under all this stress? So I'm going to say something that's going to seem a little bit harsh. And before I say it, and I'll probably need to say it after I say it, you will never catch me saying that this is easy, what I'm about to say. But as parents, as grandparents, it is our responsibility to do right by our kids emotionally, even when we are stressed out to the max, as many of us are going to be. we have to do what we can to take care of ourselves during this rough time so that we don't end up screaming and hollering at our kids or saying things to them that are really hurtful and frankly just hard to walk back. And that's hard. That's very hard. Even in much better times, my daughters are all adults, but in much better times, I can remember some things I said to my kids when we were raising that I shouldn't have said. I've yelled plenty. I've yelled at my grandkids. And so none of this is easy. But if we do wrong by our family members, which we're going to do, I mean, we're going to snap, we're going to say things, we're going to do things which we hadn't done. Let's have the grace to apologize when we calm down, make amends. You do not lose any of your authority as a parent when you apologize to your 6-year-old or your 16-year-old or your whoever. So if we do wrong, let's just be courageous and gracious enough to make it right as best we can. But that's just something that's our responsibility. An 8-year-old is not responsible for the conflict in the home. The 8-year-old does not make us scream at them. We all know that. But so anyway, that's harsh. And again, you're not going to catch me saying that's easy. I've made plenty of my own mistakes along those lines. And I'm not done yet. I'll probably be making more. So here's another thing that applies to any family which has family members in the house all day that normally wouldn't be there, even like other adults. So if you've got a bunch of people piled up in the house, you just need to avoid letting all the little annoyances and resentments and irritations build up. That's a pressure cooker metaphor, right? You got to vent that pressure cooker, vent that steam, because if you don't vent that steam, pressure cooker will haul off and blow up and send stainless steel shrapnel all through your kitchen, or worse, right? I've taken that metaphor a lot further than I should have. So you're probably going to need to say, okay, listen, everybody, we need to agree just to talk to each other and ask things of each other. Please don't do this. Please do that. Please wash the dishes. Please do this. Please stop doing that. I think we just have to do that. Let's say you got a college student who's at home, and they're sullen and irritable and grumpy. And this is an occasion for us to take a really deep breath and just imagine what it is they are going through. They're particularly all the seniors. Don't you just feel for like the college seniors and the high school seniors with all this totally unexpected end to their academic careers? The world's upside down. They don't have the connections with their friends. There's all this uncertainty, this grief about all the plans and hopes they had for winding up their senior year. And so, we just have to spot people some points, for being angry or irritable and hard to live with, and try to be patient. We're about 30 minutes in. I'm going to quickly go through and make sure I don't have any questions that are different from the ones I've got. No, we're good. Okay. So let me just start to wind up with this. Not easy. But let's try every day as we pass through this to find, we have to embrace the tragedy. Let's not shy away from that. But there's a lot of opportunities to find the grace in all of this. We have some real opportunities to teach each other, and particularly to teach young people about courage and love. Every day we are seeing examples of just incredible heroism. I think about all the healthcare workers, and we talk a lot, as we should, about doctors and nurses and first responders, and we should. But let's also remember, the home healthcare worker who is out there for very low wages, taking care of old people in their homes and other kinds of activities they do. There's nursing home employees and all those people who are putting themselves at risk for the rest of us. So we just, in small acts of charity and heroism, people are sewing masks for healthcare workers, and well, you've seen all these amazing examples. So in our worry and in our fear, in our grief, let's embrace all the best of people that this crisis is going to remind us of. And if you're out there raising kids and maybe have grandkids, it's just a tremendous opportunity to teach them about courage and selflessness and charity and so many of the things that we embrace as people of goodwill, people of faith. I'm going to stop now, and I hope we get another chance to do this again. I think we probably will. I don't think this is going to be over quickly, as we know. And so just a reminder that we are, again, thinking of you and praying for you and hoping you'll reach out to us if there's anything we can do for you. But let's conclude with a prayer. Father, you are a true source of health and healing. You heal our spirits when we call to you. You heal our bodies by the gift of medicine and the skill of those who you have inspired to be our doctors and nurses and all who work for the sick. In you there is calm and freedom from our fears and the only true peace in our world. Grant us an awareness of your presence in these troubling times and give us faith in you. In all our pain and weariness and anxiety, teach us to yield ourselves to your constant care, your love for us, knowing that your love surrounds us, trusting in your wisdom and will to give us health, comfort, strength, and peace. And well, I'm so glad you folks could join us. I think this will be archived on the, not archived, but present in its recorded form on the Facebook page. So if you thought any of this was worthwhile, you might want to send your friends to it. Hope to see you soon. Hope, whenever it is, hope to see many of you soon, and hope we get a chance to do this again. Bye-bye now. God bless.